parenting is one of my greatest joys. It's also one of the greatest challenges, probably the greatest challenge that we face. I love and respect and appreciate teachers, school teachers, so much because they spend their time and their energy and their efforts, their talents, and trying to teach children what they need to know. And that was one of my greatest surprises when I became a father, and as we've grown up together, my children and I, the greatest surprise perhaps for me is how much they don't know. They have to be taught everything. I guess when they are born, about the only thing they do know, the only thing that comes to them instinctively is to nurse, the sucking sensation. Beyond that, practically, they have to be taught everything. I'm 7 years older than my youngest brother, and so I remember some of my parents and how they treated him as we were growing up. And I remember sometimes my dad would get so aggravated at my younger brother because he did whatever it was. And my mom's response was, my dad would say, "Why did he do such and such?" And my mom's response was, "Because he's 8 years old." And as, he was 8 years old, I was 15. As a teenager, that really struck me, and it stayed with me through my parenting years thus far. Why do kids behave the way they do? Oftentimes it's because they're kids. And we as adults sometimes forget that. I get Calvin and Hobbes in the email, and I've got a collection of Calvin and Hobbes books. And boy, when it comes to reflecting kids and parents, Bill Watterson, I believe, is the author. He really hit the nail on the head many times. The mom is yelling to Calvin to come in from the snow. "It's time to come in. I can't, Mom. I've got to kill the snow goons." Now, he's got a really active imagination, He created one snowman, and then that snowman actually created other snowmen, and they're after Calvin, so there's a snow goons. She says, "You can kill them tomorrow after school. Come inside." He says, by tomorrow there'll be more of them. She said, "Let's go, Calvin. I'll listen to this next, how Calvin responds to that." Moms and reason are like blowing water. Did you ever feel that way about your mom and dad? They're not reasonable. Well, let me tell you something. It's actually kids sometimes that are not reasonable. They don't have the experience. They don't have the wisdom. They don't have the worldview that we gain as we get older. And we as parents have to be patient with that. And I like this one, family circus, especially with all the snow we've had outside the last 6 weeks. The boys are outside shoveling snow. They get about 2 steps shoveled off, and then they say, "Daddy, we're done. You can take it the rest of the way." That's the way it is sometimes with kids. I've exerted all my effort. They spent 5 minutes doing whatever it is. I've exerted all my effort. Now Mom and Dad's got to step in and take it the rest of the way. Turn to Proverbs chapter 22. And let's read a couple of verses here from Proverbs 22, and then we'll make some comments on this text. The book of Proverbs, of course, is wisdom. They are short sayings. Some of them are quite long, but generally speaking, they are short sayings that carry some kind of moral or spiritual lesson with them. And the book of Proverbs is really framed in the context of a father talking to his children, and specifically his son. Now, we boys obviously need a lot of instruction, because if any kids know nothing, it's boys. And so the father is talking to his sons in the book of Proverbs, and that's the context of the whole book, really. And so in Proverbs chapter 22, specifically verse 6 and verse 15, notice verse 6, Solomon says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." And then in verse 15, he says, "Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child." Now, God is the one who created us. God is the one who designed us. And so, if foolishness is bound up in the heart of the child, it's because that's the way God intended it. In the sense that we all have to learn. We all have to be taught. And we know nothing when we are little. We have to be taught by Mom and Dad. And so foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will remove it far from him. And so the Scriptures certainly encourage corporal punishment. Now, we're not going to talk about corporal punishment this morning. That obviously is not beating. We're going to talk about child abuse a little bit this morning. That's not beating, but it is a figure of speech that is an exaggeration to get the point across. That is, you have to discipline your children, and here discipline is referring to that harsh punishment sometimes that children need. Now, I did get beat sometimes. I got spanked 3 times in one day. I know y'all find that hard to believe, but I got spanked 3 times in one day one time. My dad was changing the oil in the car, and I was riding my bicycle. My dad said, "Don't ride your bicycle around the oil pan." Well, guess what I did? I rode my bicycle around the oil pan, and guess what happened? Satan took his hand and he pushed me over into that oil pan. Now, at the time, I did not believe I deserved a spanking because it was an accident. Isn't that what kids say? It was an accident, but I shouldn't have been riding around the oil pan to begin with, and so I got a spanking. Well, I was mad at the time because I didn't believe I deserved a spanking. So I was inside for lunch, and we had to set the table for lunch, and I was kind of slinging the plates on the table. And my mom said, "If you break one of those plates, you're going to get a spanking." The next plate that left my hand, the devil took that plate and he put it on the floor. And I got another spanking the same day. I don't remember what the third one was for. I probably blocked it out of my mind. But we have to raise children right, and discipline is one of those. Now, children are our greatest asset. As a nation, as a whole, children are our greatest asset. More important than what we produce, more important than our GDP, more important than the gold that we have, more important than our oil reserves or gas reserves or trees or wheat or whatever it is. Children are our greatest asset. And as the Church of Christ, children are our greatest asset. And the Bible school program is probably the most important work that we do. Because, and we got the witness, Dr. Beeson baptized his daughter into Christ last night. And that is one of the most important things we can do, is to immerse our children into Christ and then teach them about Jesus and what God expects out of them. The Bible school program deserves our 100% support because children are our greatest asset. Now look at what our children are experiencing in our country today. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, in 2009, there were 13.5 million single-parent households in the United States, raising 21.8 million children. Now, sometimes it has to be that way. We recognize that. Sometimes, for whatever reason, a home is left with only a mom or only a dad in the family. But that should not be the rule as it is becoming in our country. That should be the exception. Because the way God designed it, the way God intended it, children need a mama and a dad. Because both of them put together provide emotionally and intellectually and spiritually and in other ways what God desires children to experience. And so it takes both moms and dads to raise children. Now, we have a problem with abusive parents in our country. According to the National Child Abuse and Neglect Data System back in 2005, the statistics are about 5 years old, there are over 3 million referrals of child abuse in our country today. And that is astounding. Over 3 million instances of child abuse in our country, whether it's physical abuse or sexual abuse or emotional abuse or medical abuse or just outright neglect in our country. And there are nearly 900,000 cases each year. Almost 900,000 cases. And I saw the statistics going back for about 6 or 7 years. About 900,000 every year. And do you know who the major perpetrator of abuse is? The parents. Now that was a shock to me. I would have thought it would have been mama's boyfriend or daddy's girlfriend who was the major abuser. But they're only 3.8% of the cases. The majority of cases of abuse in the home is from mom and dad. Almost 7% are from other relatives. 40% this reflects the fact that there's not daddies in the home. 40% of abuse is from moms. 40%, 18% are from dads. In 2005, 1,400 children died each year because of abuse from mom and dad. 1,400 children. Children are our greatest asset. And too many people don't treat them. Not only that, this is off the subject. No, it's on the subject, but it's off the nose. In the United States, and we saw this worldwide, that Americans are not having enough children. The problem that we're facing in the future with our Social Security and our Medicare as a nation is because parents in previous generations did not have enough children. And so there's not been enough children entering the workforce in order to support the previous generation that is fixing to hit retirement and start drawing on all this Social Security and Medicare and so forth. Think about that. The reason why, one of the reasons at least, why we're having a crisis, an economic crisis in our country, is that because we have quit having children. For whatever reason, and I suspect a big part of it is because we want to spend money on ourselves, we want to spend time on ourselves, and there's too many parents that are too many adults who think children are a waste of time and a drain on their resources, and I don't see the joy in it. Maybe the reason why they don't see the joy in it is because their parents did not look at parenting as being a joy. And so we have a demographic problem in our country today. We have a problem, obviously, with drugs. National Institute for Drug Abuse says that illicit drug use is on the rise. It has been over the last 8 years. Has been over the last 8 years. You can see from this chart how the drug use of various drugs have grown. 8% of children over the age of 12 have used drugs. Almost 22 million children have used drugs the previous month from when the survey was taken. Marijuana, methamphetamines, ecstasy, and so forth. Alcohol, obviously, is being abused by our children. 1/3, 1 out of every 3 high schoolers have binge drank or been drunk in the previous year from when this survey was taken. Of course, engaging in sexual behavior. 33% of ninth graders, 1 out of every 3 ninth graders have had a sexual experience. 2 out of 3 high schoolers, seniors, have had a sexual experience. And the median age is around 17 years old. We're going to have a lesson later this year on sexual promiscuity and sexual purity, because the Bible teaches a lot about it, and we need to teach it to our children. And then one more thing, dealing with what our children have to suffer, and that is poverty. According to the Institute for Research on Poverty in 2009, 20% of individuals under the age of 18 live in poverty. 20%, 1 out of every 5 children live in poverty. But that's not a financial problem. Since President Lyndon Johnson declared a war on poverty back in the 60s, we have poured billions, if not trillions of dollars into anti-poverty measure. And what do we have today? More people today are living on food stamps than ever before. The problem is in the home. The problem is because daddy is not acting like daddy and mom is not acting like mama. That's the problem. The problem is that families are not living the way God intended them to live. And anytime we leave the pattern that God has left us, we're going to run into problems. We need to understand that, and we need to get back to the pattern of being parents the way God intended it to be. So Proverbs 22 and verse 6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. First of all, this verse does not teach what sometimes we think it teaches or what some people say it means. In other words, Solomon is not saying you teach your children about Jesus Christ and they'll always believe in Jesus Christ and they'll always be faithful. That's not what Solomon is saying. Rarely can you take one proverb from the book of Proverbs and say this is true all the time and in every circumstance. Because that would take away man's